Hey, Blade!
Once upon a time, in the foggy streets of London, a newborn came into the world under some very tragic circumstances. The baby's mother was attacked by a vampire while pregnant and died during childbirth. She died in agony, but what she did leave behind was a boy with a secret pulsing in his veins. That boy would grow up, not ordinary, not cursed, but something entirely different. His name was Eric Brooks, a.k.a. Blade. Blade grew up to be the ultimate vampire hunter, feared by the undead and admired by fans worldwide. This was just the beginning of his insane journey, because there's so much more than meets the eye. Today, we're diving into 25 insane facts about Blade that even hardcore fans might have missed. We're excited to get into it, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means an awful lot. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Blade, the unsung pioneer of the superhero movie boom. When people talk about the birth of the modern superhero movie, they often jump straight to X-Men from 2000 or Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, which came out in 2002. But long before either of those films, it was Blade in 1998 that truly cracked the code. Directed by Stephen Norrington, the film starred Wesley Snipes as the half-human, half-vampire vampire hunter. In all honesty, Blade was Marvel's first real box office and critical triumph. The film was made on a budget of about $45 million and grossed over $130 million worldwide, which is a pretty impressive haul for a comic book adaptation, especially at a time when superhero movies were seen as risky investments at best. Blade proved that comic book movies could appeal to adult audiences since it leaned heavily into R-rated violence with some stylish action. Mind you, this was the time studios considered superhero films campy, kid-friendly content, so a darker, more serious tone kinda worked in their favor. Not to forget, Wesley Snipes' performance gave Blade a cool, charismatic edge that helped redefine what a comic book hero could look like on the screen. Without the success of Blade, studios may never have felt confident enough to greenlight bigger projects like X-Men and Spider-Man. So, in many ways, Blade walked so the MCU could run. Blade's true comic origins. In Marvel Comics, Blade's origin story is much different from what audiences saw in the movies. Eric Brooks was actually raised in a brothel by a woman named Madame Vanity. His mother, Tara Brooks, was killed during childbirth, after which Blade was left a lone wolf with a unique ability. This set him apart from other humans from the minute he was born. Madame Vanity was the owner of the brothel where Tara used to work, so she took Blade in and raised him as her own. Needless to say, growing up on the tough streets of London's East End, Blade was exposed early to the dangers of the world. Meet Jamal Afari, Blade's true mentor before Whistler existed. Long before Abraham Whistler appeared on the big screen, Blade's original mentor in the comics was a man named Jamal Afari. Introduced in Blade's early comic appearances, Afari was an older black jazz musician and a skilled vampire hunter in his own right. After discovering young Eric Brooks fighting off a gang of vampires in London, Afari took him under his wing and trained Blade how to fight, hunt, and survive, and shaped him into the vampire slayer we know today. Afari played a crucial role in instilling in him a deep sense of purpose and discipline. The void of the father figure in his life was filled by Afari's presence, as their relationship was built on mutual respect and survival in a brutal world. In fact, his mentorship gave Blade the foundation he needed to wage his lifelong war against the undead. The films changed this backstory significantly by introducing Whistler, who, by the way, was an original character created specifically for the Blade movie universe. Whistler played a similar role to Afari, but with a more hardened persona. So, while his character became iconic thanks to Chris Christopherson's portrayal, comic book fans know that Blade's first steps into the supernatural world were actually guided by a jazz musician turned vampire hunter. What's the reason behind his name? Blade's creation has some surprisingly personal origins. Writer Marv Wolfman, who co-created the character alongside artist Gene Colan, revealed that he named Blade after his own dog. It wasn't some grand symbolic choice tied to sharpness or violence at first, it was simply a name Wolfman liked, and it fit the fierce, no-nonsense vampire hunter they were developing for the Tomb of Dracula. While Wolfman provided the name and the rough character concept, much of Blade's iconic imagery came from Gene Colan. At the time, Colan was fascinated with sword and sorcery stories, particularly the dynamic and stylish ways blades and knives were depicted in action scenes. That passion heavily influenced Blade's look, as Colan gave him his signature leather jacket, armed him with wooden knives, and made sure he was constantly in motion, slashing and fighting his way through with a distinct knife play style to set him apart. Originally, Blade wasn't even a half-vampire. he was a pure human vampire hunter, and even though the character's supernatural upgrades came years later, the foundations remained the same. How Blade truly gained his superhuman powers in Marvel Comics. In Blade's earliest comic appearances, he didn't have the enhanced superhuman abilities most fans associate with him today. Originally, Blade was simply a highly trained human with exceptional martial arts skills and a natural immunity to vampire bites. It wasn't until a pivotal encounter with Morbius that Blade's powers truly evolved. Now, Morbius isn't a true vampire, he was a human who was mutated through a failed science experiment. The event happened in Peter Parker's Spider-Man #8 in 1999 during a battle with Morbius, where Blade was bitten. But unlike a traditional vampire bite, Morbius's infection interacted differently with Blade's unique physiology and awakened supernatural abilities within him. After this particular encounter, Blade developed several vampiric traits like superhuman strength, speed, agility, enhanced senses, and accelerated healing. More importantly, while he acquired some powers and vampire-like hunger, it didn't completely dominate him the way it would with other infected beings. That's how he kept his mind and body in check. Without Morbius's accidental transformation, Blade might have remained a grounded street-level hero rather than the powerhouse vampire hunter he's celebrated as today. The Nightstalkers. Blade didn't work alone in the comics, not always at least. For a significant stretch of his history, he was part of a vampire hunting team called the Nightstalkers. Formed during the early 1990s Marvel horror revival, the Nightstalkers were a group of supernatural specialists who dedicated their lives to battling vampires and demons. The core lineup included Blade, along with Frank Drake, Rachel Van Helsing, and Hannibal King. Together, they operated out of Boston under the secretive government agency called SHOCK, Special Hazardous Operations Command. Each member brought unique strengths, Blade with his supernatural abilities, King with his vampiric powers and strong moral compass, and Drake with his knowledge of the occult. The Nightstalkers made their debut in Nightstalkers #1 in 1992, spinning out of the events of the larger Rise of the Midnight Suns crossover. This team-up allowed Blade to become part of a larger Marvel horror landscape alongside characters like Ghost Rider and Doctor Strange. Blade was deeply mistrustful by nature, but he was willing to form bonds when the mission demanded it. While the Nightstalkers series only lasted 18 issues, it remained a cult favorite among fans. Why Blade is called the Legendary Daywalker. As we discussed, Blade has an advantage over nearly every other vampire he hunts because, unlike them, he's not vulnerable to sunlight. When Tara Brooks was attacked by Deacon Frost while she was giving birth, his bite deployed vampiric enzymes into her bloodstream during labor, and as a result, Blade inherited certain vampiric traits without becoming a full-fledged vampire himself. In essence, Blade was born as a hybrid who possessed their strength without their crippling weaknesses like sunlight, garlic, and holy symbols, at least in most comic versions. Because of this rare immunity to the sun, both humans and vampires dubbed him the Daywalker. Among vampire circles, the term carried a mix of fear and superstition because it meant that they weren't safe even during the day. In various adaptations, including the Blade film trilogy, this trait is highlighted as a key reason why Blade is so dangerous to them. He can operate around the clock while tracking, stalking, and eliminating his prey with no limitation. Was Blade introduced as a villain in the comics? Nah, Blade's our morally gray character. He was never introduced as a villain in Marvel Comics, even from his very first appearance. Blade was a heroic figure for the world, although his methods were far more brutal and aggressive compared to traditional Marvel heroes of the time. Blade debuted in The Tomb of Dracula #10, 1973, where we see him burst onto the scene as a vampire hunter and immediately attack Dracula himself. His early characterization leaned heavily into his street-smart, no-nonsense personality, where he didn't hesitate to use violence. In fact, he's someone who's not particularly interested in playing by the rules either, but his primary goal was always clear. Over time, Blade's character was further refined, adding layers of tragedy and an internal conflict. It's easy to see why some casual fans might mistakenly think Blade started as a villain. His tough demeanor and tendency to work alone all painted him as an outsider, even among other heroes. However, in the world of Tomb of Dracula, where the main character was a literal monster, Blade stood out as a rare human force of righteousness. Now, we know that his sometimes aggressive and relentless attitude can put him at odds with others, but we have no doubt that he's always fighting for good. Do crosses repel vampires in the Blade universe? Yeah, but with some important twists. In the Blade universe, both comics and film, crosses can repel vampires, but it's not as simple as just flashing a crucifix. The power of the cross depends heavily on the belief and faith behind it, since it's not inherently magical. So, if someone firmly believes in the symbol's power, it can be a potent weapon against a vampire. Blade himself doesn't usually rely heavily on religious symbols. He tends to favor more direct methods like silver stakes or UV light weapons. That fits his character as well, practical and efficient. In the Blade movie trilogy, crosses are referenced but aren't portrayed as major weapons in Blade's arsenal. So, while crosses can work in the Blade universe, they're not as universally effective as Hollywood's classic vampire tales might suggest. The Latin term Whistler uses for vampires. In the 1998 Blade movie, Whistler refers to vampires as Homo Sanguinius, which is basically meant to describe vampires as a separate, predatory offshoot of humanity. Homo means man, and sanguinius means blood, so Homo Sanguinius roughly translates to blood man or blood drinker, underlining vampires' dependency on human blood for survival. This little detail in the film helped ground the vampires in a more scientific, biological framework rather than purely supernatural mythology. It fits the world-building choice the filmmakers made, so these vampires feel more like a hidden species living among humans and not just cursed magical beings. Interestingly, this term was invented specifically for the movies. In the comics, vampires are usually just called vampires, the undead, or something similar, with their origins tied more closely to supernatural forces. The comics did later lean into some genetic explanation, especially when Blade's popularity from the movies fed back into Marvel's publishing, but Homo Sanguinius as a formal species name started on the big screen. Whistler also refers to them as Men of the Night in the film, but that's more of a descriptive nickname. The time Blade became more vampire than man. In a strange and dark twist on Blade's comic book history, there was a time where he actually lost his shadow. This was a sign that he was becoming more vampire than human, and it occurred during the Curse of the Mutants storyline in 2010. This was a crossover event where vampires tried to resurrect Dracula and unleash a massive vampire plague. During these battles, Blade was exposed to powerful mystical forces and began showing signs of infection beyond just his hybrid nature. One of those was losing his shadow. Traditionally, losing one's reflection symbolizes a complete severance from humanity. This essentially meant that Blade was inching closer to becoming what he hated most, which felt like a psychological blow. Thankfully, Blade eventually fought off these darker influences with sheer willpower and assistance from allies like the X-Men, but it remains as one of the more symbolic moments in his history. Why did Whistler become Blade's mentor? Whistler's motivation for partnering with Blade stems from a deeply personal tragedy, something that forever altered his life. You see, Whistler had a family, a wife and daughter, but they were killed by, you guessed it, vampires. This tragedy left him with an obvious hatred for vamps, which continued throughout his life. He had an innate need to wipe them out as a species, no matter the cost. Whistler sees Blade's war as a personal crusade to avenge his family. That was the core of their relationship. His guilt for not protecting his family and his obsessive desire to eradicate them. It also represented Whistler's attempt to find some kind of redemption for himself by trying to undo the darkness that haunted him. The epic team-up between Blade and Ghost Rider. Yup, Blade once teamed up with none other than Ghost Rider. We know it's an unusual pairing. One is a Daywalker, the other is a fiery, hellbound spirit of vengeance on a motorcycle, but their team-up in Marvel Comics made perfect sense considering their shared mission of eliminating dark forces. We see this in the Ghost Rider comics, specifically in Ghost Rider number 28 in 1992. In this issue, Blade and Ghost Rider join forces to battle a powerful vampire threat with their worst enemies. But Blade's expertise and Ghost Rider's powers made them a formidable pair against even the most dangerous of monsters. We see them fighting against the vampire organization known as the Vampire Nation. While Blade's combat skills and technology help him take on the vampires head-on, Ghost Rider brings in his hellfire-powered weaponry and near-immortal nature. In fact, Ghost Rider's penance stare makes the wrongdoers relive their worst sins, adding a layer of justice that Blade's more direct methods sometimes fail to achieve. Their partnership is short-lived, but it's a memorable moment in the Marvel Universe since we see how these two complement each other's strengths. Blade's mysterious third eye power. Blade's third eye ability is one of the more mysterious powers in his arsenal, and while not as frequently used as his physical strength, this power plays a key role in enhancing his ability to fight vampires. The third eye essentially allows Blade to see things beyond normal human perception, which at times gives him an edge in combat. Consider it an extra sensory perception on top of his already impressive heightened senses. Once activated, Blade can see hidden threats, invisible enemies, and things like illusions or shape-shifting vampires. This particular power was introduced in the comics during the Blade Vampire Hunter storyline in the late 90s. It's also linked to Blade's connection to the supernatural, more deeply reflecting his unique genetic makeup. Now, it doesn't really make him invincible, but it's still a tactical advantage in a fight. Blade's first solo comic book run. The year was 1973 when we saw Blade's first solo comic book appearance. It was in Tomb of Dracula number 10. His popularity in this book gave way to other issues where an anti-hero with a darker edge resonated with readers. So it wasn't long before Marvel saw the potential for his solo adventures. In 1994, we saw that with the launch of Blade the Vampire Hunter, a miniseries that ran for 3 issues. Blade faced off against numerous threats in that one, but the stories were more popular for delving into his psyche. This series was just the beginning of Marvel's deeper exploration of Blade as a standalone character. Over the years, he would go on to star in numerous solo series and miniseries, thereby building a loyal following and cementing his place in Marvel lore. The surprising cameo of a famous adult film star's daughter in Blade. Yeah, you heard that one right. Something fans may not realize is that the film features 2 surprise cameos from individuals with very different backgrounds, Tracy Lords and Shannon Lee. Tracy Lords played the character Raquel in the Blade movie. She made her name in the adult entertainment industry, but eventually made the shift to mainstream Hollywood. In fact, she appeared in more films like Crybaby in 1990 and Not of This Earth in 95. As Raquel, her role is as one of the vampire gang members that he must face. On the other hand, Shannon Lee, daughter of Bruce Lee, also made an appearance in the film as a member of the vampire gang. She acted more as a subtle tribute to her father's influence on martial arts films and the action genre as a whole. These 2 unexpected cameos surely added a unique flavor to the film. The darkest battle within Blade. Sometimes the greatest fights we have to endure are the ones within ourselves. Blade was no stranger to that feeling. He was half human after all. The greatest battle he fought was constantly trying to keep his vampire side in check, because submitting to that would mean losing everything he ever stood for. This internal struggle is what truly defines his character, and while he may appear relentless, he's fighting against his own vampiric bloodlust at all times. But how does he manage to control it? More on that later. Which famous electronic band almost composed the Blade soundtrack? In a fascinating turn of events, the legendary electronic band The Prodigy almost composed the entire soundtrack for Blade. They're very famous for their iconic beats and tracks like Firestarter and Smack My Bitch Up. The Prodigy were in talks to create the score for the film because their style of electronic music with punk rock and rave culture was a perfect fit for Blade's dark and edgy aesthetic. Many felt that their energy would nicely complement Blade's vampire action, but alas, this one's always going to be a could-have been. Despite initial interest, the collaboration never really came to life, but if you notice carefully, their influence on the film's sound can still be felt, particularly in the movie's iconic club scenes where electronic music pulses through the action. The final score was composed by Mark Isham. Now, their music might not be as chaotic as the Prodigy's, but it still captured the high-intensity action element of the movie. Why Blade has so little dialogue in the Blade films. The minimal dialogue was a deliberate choice made by the actor, Wesley Snipes. He believed that Blade should be a man of action, not words. This particular mindset also influenced his portrayal of the character. The decision was about reflecting Blade's tough nature as it helped enhance the character's intensity. Blade, being the man on a mission to rid the world of vampires, is driven by vengeance, leaving little to no time for lengthy conversations. Silence is often also known to contribute to a character's mysterious and intimidating presence, so this decision seemed to work for all the right reasons, as it made every word he spoke even more impactful. In addition, according to Snipes' vision, Blade's reserved nature mirrored his personal struggle with his vampire side, which gave him a darker presence on screen. How did Blade make its mark at the box office despite being R-rated? Blade truly defied industry expectations and became a box office success even after being rated R. You see, R ratings typically limit a movie's audience by restricting younger viewers, so it's usually seen as a significant risk for a film's commercial prospects, but Blade proved that with the right mix of action and a stunning protagonist, movies can easily overcome this limitation. Blade was packed with graphic violence and mature themes, which made it look appealing for adult audiences who were craving more intense, action-packed films. Not to overlook the blend of martial arts, horror, comic book elements, and sci-fi, all of which attracted a more diverse audience for the movie, including action fans and horror fanatics who love a bit of sci-fi. More significantly, the success led to a larger conversation about the potential for more adult-oriented superhero films, especially those based on characters from the darker corners of the comic universe. So, you know, when done right, an R rating can turn into a selling point for the right kind of film. The hidden vampire cameo by a crew member in Blade. Wesley wasn't the only one to make a memorable appearance in the movie. The film's screenwriter appears in a fun cameo as a vampire. Yeah, David S. Goyer literally appeared in a nightclub scene where Blade takes on a large group of vampires in the bloodbath sequence. So yeah, he contributed more to that film than just writing dialogue. You can even look for him as an Easter egg now that you know about it. Stephen Norrington also included a few cameos from other crew members, which is often a fun tradition in filmmaking. Goyer's cameo as a vampire is especially fitting given his key role in shaping the film's script and story. The secret skill Blade didn't know he had. There's a surprising skill in Blade's arsenal called nautical training. It's indeed a lesser-known aspect of Blade's abilities and stems from his background in survival skills training tied to the sea. In the comics, Blade's upbringing as a young man contributed to his multifaceted skill set, and it's revealed that he was taught to handle various forms of transportation, including boats and ships. His nautical training is not central to his character, but it is still a part of his training to make him a more resourceful and adaptable hero. It adds depth to his character, making him way more than just a one-dimensional vampire hunter. Whether he's fighting vampires on the streets or potentially needing to escape across water, his skills make him a true survivor in any scenario. Is there a Carnage version of Blade? That's right, Eric Brooks once wore an alien symbiote, and not just any symbiote, the Carnage symbiote. In Carnage, Black, White, and Blood number 3 in 2021, an alternate version of Blade is introduced where he's bonded with the Carnage symbiote. This transforms him into a hybrid character who retains his vampiric abilities and enhanced strength, but gains the destructive and chaotic powers of Carnage. This version has an even more brutal and wild personality, truly focusing on the darker aspects of his character. The storyline involves an exploration of how Blade's hunting abilities would be enhanced by the symbiote's influence. Now, this version didn't last too long, but it adds an interesting what-if scenario to the character's lore. The stunt behind the action, Wesley Snipes' hands-on approach in Blade. Wesley Snipes' dedication to his role as Blade went far beyond simply acting. He was heavily involved in the film's action sequences and did nearly all of his own stunts. This level of commitment surely elevated the action scenes in Blade and made them feel more authentic. Snipes himself is highly trained in martial arts, particularly kung fu and capoeira. Therefore, he insisted on performing many of his own stunts to bring the character's skills to life in a visceral way. This decision also kept the film's tone grounded and emphasized Blade's physical prowess as a vampire hunter. In fact, that sense of raw intensity in a character wouldn't be possible with a stunt double. Snipes' hard work and physicality became a hallmark of Blade's character, and it's one of the reasons why the film has remained so beloved by fans of action and comic book movies alike. How does Blade control his bloodlust? It seems very improbable that a person could inherit the powers of a vampire without being cursed by the bloodlust that's seen as a common trait. It was indeed one of Blade's most significant internal struggles. As a half-vampire, Blade's body is naturally inclined to crave human blood. It's common to assume that he would be vulnerable to the same temptation that drives many vampires to violence. But you see, Blade is different because of his sheer willpower and discipline, which he's developed over the years to suppress his dark urges. In the comics, Blade controls his bloodlust through a combination of mental focus and physical training. This resolve is what keeps him from succumbing to the darkness within, and while it does seem difficult, this is Blade we're talking about after all. Okay, so there's another secret. He relies on medicine and various serums which help regulate his bloodlust. These specially formulated concoctions prevent his vampiric side from becoming dominant. In fact, the serum has also proved to help him tackle the sunlight sensitivity issue. Nothing wrong with blending a little science and magic, right? Regardless of how he does it, Blade's ability to withstand his bloodlust is a testament to the strength of his character. Marvelous verdict! And that wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of Blade the Vampire Hunter. We've seen everything, from his martial arts mastery to the struggles with his vampire side. Blade remains one of the most compelling and unique characters in comic book history. His journey is one of redemption and relentless action, making him a true icon in both comic and film. What was your favorite moment in the Blade universe? Do let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this list, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more insights into your favorite characters. We've got a lot more marvelous videos coming your way, so stay tuned for that. And until then, keep embracing your inner hero.